Welcome to Nightling, where true horror never sleeps. If you're brave enough, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell because the night is only just beginning. Every school has its rules. Don't run in the hallways. Don't cheat on tests. Don't talk back to teachers. But at Jefferson High, there was one rule that wasn't written in any handbook. One rule that every student learned through whispered warnings in the cafeteria and hurried conversations by the lockers. Never walk behind a school building alone after 3 p.m. I wish I had listened. Jefferson High was built in 1962, a sprawling brick structure that had seen 3 generations of students pass through its doors. The main building faced the street, all glass and modern updates, but if you walked around to the back, you'd find the original structure. Older brick, smaller windows, and a narrow alley between the main building and the old gymnasium that seemed to trap shadows even on the brightest days. The back of the school was where the maintenance shed sat, rusted and forgotten, where the old fire escape clung to the building like a metal skeleton, where the dumpsters created dark corners that the afternoon sun never quite reached. It was October when I first heard about the girl. Sarah Martinez, a senior, was telling her friends about it during lunch. Her voice dropped to a whisper as she leaned across the table. "My cousin graduated 5 years ago," she said, glancing around to make sure no teachers were listening. "She told me about this girl who appears behind the school, always around 3:15, right when the buses are loading. She just stands there, watching." "What does she look like?" someone asked. Sarah's eyes went wide. That's the thing. Nobody can ever remember her face clearly. Just that she's wearing a school uniform from like the 80s or something. And she never moves. Just watches until you look away, and then she's gone. I laughed it off. Urban legends were nothing new at Jefferson High. Every school had them. The ghost in the auditorium. The janitor who died in the basement. The usual teenage folklore designed to make boring school days more interesting. But then I started noticing things that was a Tuesday in late October when I first broke the rule. Not intentionally, of course. I had stayed after school for debate team practice, and by the time we finished, the buses had long since departed. My mom was stuck in traffic, so I decided to walk to the nearby gas station to wait for her there. The quickest route was behind the school. I checked my phone as I pushed through the back doors. 3:20 p.m. The sun was already low, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot behind the building. My footsteps echoed off the brick walls as I walked toward the alley between the main building and the gym. That's when I saw her. She was standing by the maintenance shed, maybe 30 feet away. At first, I thought it was just another student who had missed her bus. But something about her stillness made me stop walking. She wasn't checking her phone or looking around anxiously like someone waiting for a ride. She was just standing there, facing the building, completely motionless. Her uniform was wrong. The skirt was longer than what we wore now, and the blouse had a different collar. Even from a distance, the clothes looked faded, like they had been washed too many times or left in the sun too long. "Hey," I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I intended in the empty space. "You okay?" She didn't respond, didn't even turn around. I took a few steps closer, my sneakers crunching on the gravel. "Miss your bus? I can call someone for you." Still nothing. The rational part of my brain kicked in. Maybe she had headphones in. Maybe she was upset about something and didn't want to talk. Maybe she was just one of those weird kids who like to be alone. But as I got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach clench with unease. She wasn't breathing. I couldn't see her chest rising and falling. Her shoulders didn't move. Even her hair, which hung loose around her shoulders, didn't stir in the October breeze that was making my own jacket flutter. I stopped walking when I was about 10 feet away from her. "Hello." I tried again, louder this time. That's when she turned around. I wish I could tell you exactly what her face looked like. I've tried to remember, lying awake at night, replaying that moment over and over. But it's like trying to remember a dream after you've been awake for hours. The details slip away no matter how hard you try to hold on to them. What I do remember is the feeling, the sudden, overwhelming certainty that I was looking at something that shouldn't exist, something that belonged to a different time, a different world, something that was very, very wrong. She looked at me for maybe 3 seconds. Then she smiled, and I ran. I didn't tell anyone about what happened that first day. What was I going to say? That I saw a girl in an old uniform who gave me the creeps? That I ran away from a fellow student like a scared child? But I couldn't stop thinking about her. Over the next few days, I found myself paying attention to conversations I would have normally ignored, listening for any mention of the girl behind the school. And once I started listening, I heard more than I expected. My brother saw her last month. A sophomore named Jake whispered to his friends during study hall. Said she was standing right by the dumpsters, just staring at the building. When he blinked, she was gone. That's nothing, replied his friend Marcus. My sister's friend Emma saw her 3 times last year. Always in the same spot. Always wearing that weird old uniform. I started doing research. During lunch, I would slip into the library and search through old yearbooks, looking for any girl who might match the description. The problem was, nobody could ever describe her clearly. It was always vague details. Brown hair, maybe blonde. Average height. Pale skin. The only consistent detail was the uniform. Mrs. Henderson, the librarian, noticed me flipping through the older yearbooks one day. Working on a history project? She asked, adjusting her glasses as she looked over my shoulder. Something like that, I said. I'm trying to find information about a student who might have gone here in the 80s. Her expression grew curious. Do you have a name? I shook my head. Just a description. And I know she wore the old uniform style. Mrs. Henderson was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out a chair and sat down next to me. You know, she said slowly, I've been working here for 15 years, and you're not the first student to come looking through these old books with that same vague description. My heart started beating faster. What do you mean? Every few years, someone comes in asking about a girl from the 80s. Always the same story. Someone saw her behind the school, but they can never quite remember what she looked like. She paused, studying my face. Have you seen her? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Mrs. Henderson sighed and pulled one of the yearbooks toward her. Flipping to a page she seemed to know by heart. Her name was Rebecca Chen. She was a junior in 1987. The photograph showed a girl with dark hair and a shy smile, wearing the old-style uniform I'd seen. But looking at the picture, I felt that same strange, slipping sensation I had experienced when trying to remember her face. Even with the photo right in front of me, I couldn't quite hold onto the details. What happened to her? I asked. Mrs. Henderson's expression grew sad. She disappeared on October 31st, 1987, Halloween night. There was a school dance that evening, but Rebecca never made it inside. Her parents found her car in the parking lot the next morning, keys still in the ignition, but she was nowhere to be found. Did they ever find out what happened? No. The police investigated for months. They searched the woods behind the school, dragged the pond at Miller Park, interviewed every student who had been at the dance. But Rebecca Chen simply vanished without a trace. I stared at the yearbook photo, trying to reconcile the smiling girl in the picture with the motionless figure I had seen by the maintenance shed. Mrs. Henderson, I said quietly, what's today's date? She glanced at her computer screen. October 29th. What? 2 days until Halloween. 2 days until the anniversary of Rebecca Chen's disappearance. That afternoon, I broke the rule again. I told myself I was just curious, that I wanted to see if she would appear again, now that I knew who she was. But deep down, I think I knew there was more to it than that. Something was drawing me back to that alley behind the school, something stronger than curiosity. I waited until 3:15, then slipped out the back doors. She was there. This time, she was standing closer to the building, right underneath the old fire escape. The late afternoon sun cast the metal stairs shadow across her face, but I could see her more clearly than before. She was definitely wearing the uniform from the yearbook photo. The longer skirt, a different collar, even the style of shoes was from a different era. But there was something else different about her appearance, something that made my skin crawl. She looked exactly the same as she had in the 1987 yearbook photo. Not older, not younger. Exactly the same. As if 35 years hadn't passed at all. I approached slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. This time, I was determined not to run. I needed to understand what was happening. Rebecca, I called out when I was about 15 feet away. She turned toward me, and this time I forced myself to look directly at her face. It was like trying to focus on something underwater. The features seemed to shift and blur no matter how hard I concentrated. But her eyes were clear, dark and sad and infinitely tired. "You know my name?" she said, and her voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. Even though she was standing right in front of me, I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "No one has said my name in so long," she continued. "They see me, but they don't remember. They can't remember. What happened to you?" I managed to ask. Rebecca looked toward the building, then back at me. "I was supposed to go to the dance. I had a new dress, blue with silver trim. I was so excited." Her voice carried a wistfulness that made my chest ache. "But I never made it inside." "Why not?" "Someone was waiting for me, behind the school. Someone I trusted." Her expression grew darker, and the temperature around us seemed to drop several degrees. "Someone who made sure I would never tell what I had seen." "What had you seen?" But even as I asked the question, I could feel her starting to fade. Not disappearing exactly, but becoming less solid, less present. "The same thing you're about to see," she whispered. "He's still here, still waiting, still choosing." "Who?" I asked desperately. "Who's still here?" But she was already gone, leaving only the echo of her words and the sudden, overwhelming certainty that I was no longer alone behind the school. I heard the footsteps before I saw him. Slow, deliberate steps coming from the direction of the maintenance shed. The same shed where I had first seen Rebecca standing, motionless and watching. I turned around and my blood turned to ice. Mr. Garrett, the night janitor, was walking toward me. He had worked at Jefferson High for as long as anyone could remember, a quiet man who kept to himself and did his job without complaint. Students barely noticed him, which I now realized might have been exactly what he wanted. "You shouldn't be back here," he said, his voice carrying a tone I had never heard from him before. Not the mild, almost apologetic way he usually spoke to students, but something harder, something dangerous. "I was just leaving," I said, taking a step backward. "No," he said, still walking toward me with those slow, measured steps. "I don't think you are." That's when I understood. Rebecca hadn't disappeared on her own. She hadn't run away or gotten lost. Someone had made sure she never made it to that Halloween dance. Someone who had been at the school for decades, invisible and trusted, with access to every corner of the building. Someone who was still here. "You saw her, didn't you?" Mr. Garrett asked, and there was something almost sad in his voice. "They always see her eventually. The curious ones. The ones who don't follow the rules." I took another step back, my mind racing. The back doors to the school were behind him. The only other exit was through the alley, but that would mean getting past him first. "She was going to tell," he continued, as if we were having a normal conversation. "Rebecca. She saw me with the money from the fundraiser. Saw me putting it in my car instead of taking it to the bank like I was supposed to. Such a small thing, really. A few $100s. But she was going to tell. That was 35 years ago," I said, my voice shaking. "Why is she still here?" Mr. Garrett smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "Because she's waiting for someone to believe her. Someone to listen to her story." "I'll believe her," I said quickly. "I'll tell everyone. I'll go to the police." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You won't." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that glinted in the fading sunlight. A knife, old and worn, but sharp enough to do what it had done before. That's when Rebecca appeared again. She materialized between Mr. Garrett and me, more solid than I had ever seen her. Her face was clear now, no longer blurred or shifting. She looked exactly like the girl in the yearbook photo, except for her eyes. Her eyes held 35 years of anger. "No more," she said, and her voice carried the weight of decades of waiting. "No more children." Mr. Garrett stumbled backward, the knife falling from his hand as he stared at Rebecca in shock and terror. "You're dead," he whispered. "I made sure you were dead." "Death doesn't end everything," Rebecca replied. "Sometimes it just gives you time to get stronger." What happened next is hard to describe. The temperature plummeted so quickly that I could see my breath in the air. The shadows around us seemed to deepen and move, reaching toward Mr. Garrett like grasping fingers. He screamed. It was a sound I hope I never hear again, full of terror and recognition, and the sudden understanding of 35 years' worth of consequences catching up all at once. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything went quiet. Mr. Garrett was gone. Not dead, not disappeared, just gone, as if he had never been there at all. Rebecca turned to me one last time. Her face was peaceful now, the anger replaced by something that looked almost like relief. "Thank you," she said, "for remembering my name, for listening to my story." "What happens now?" I asked. She smiled, and for the first time, it was a genuinely happy expression. "Now I can rest, and you can go home." The next morning, the police found evidence in Mr. Garrett's apartment. Bank records showing decades of stolen money, personal items that had belonged to Rebecca Chen, and a journal detailing what had really happened on Halloween night, 1987. Equipment. But I've learned something important from my experience with Rebecca Chen. Sometimes the rules exist for good reasons. Sometimes the stories whispered in cafeterias and hallways contain more truth than we want to believe. And sometimes the dead are just waiting for someone to listen. If you're ever at your school after hours and you see someone who doesn't quite belong, someone whose details you can't quite remember, maybe don't ignore them. Maybe they have a story that needs to be told. Maybe they've been waiting a very long time for someone to care enough to listen. Because the dead don't always rest easy, and some stories refuse to stay buried. Have you ever seen something you couldn't explain? Do you believe places can hold on as secrets and spirits? If you were in my shoes, would you try to uncover the truth behind Rebecca's disappearance? Or would you leave the past buried? Share your thoughts or your own ghost stories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a journey into the darkness. And remember, some mysteries are waiting for you to solve them, if you dare. Candle, what would you do if you heard a voice calling for help from the shadows? Let's talk about it in the comments. Your story might be the next to haunt these halls.